Hello there, welcome to this week's Simpson Lectures event, the Red Sofa event, which is sponsored by the Andrew D. McRae Center for Faith and Culture here at Acadia Divinity College, where we explore issues that are relevant to the world today. So much of our work here at Acadia Divinity College is really focused on just that, but that work coalesces in the research and the work that goes on through the McRae Center. We're grateful that you've joined us today. We're going to have a great conversation with our Simpson Lectures for this week. The Rev Dr. Rhonda Britton and Rev Dr. Lennett Anderson. I almost called you Andrew, I don't know why. But we're just delighted that they're here with us in this context where we get to engage with them a little bit less formally and where you can ask some questions eventually, but I get to ask mine first because I have lots of things I'd like to chat with them. So first of all, thank you both for being here this week, for stepping into this issue with vulnerability, with passion, and with a sense that this is what Jesus wants the church to be doing. So I want to thank you for the conviction that you bring to it, and yet the winsomeness, and which helps all of us to step into what we need to be doing and how we need to respond. So I want to say thank you. First of all, I wonder when the question first came to you, would you take up this assignment of speaking at the Simpson Lectures? What went through your head? Was this something you thought, oh great, what an opportunity, or oh no?
I think a little bit of both. For me personally, one of the things I always like to, or that I always say, I shouldn't say like to say, but I always say is that, oh, I don't think I could do that. I'm not an academician. I just feel like it's a scholarly type of a thing, and then I'm reminded, well, it's Simpsons, it's practitioners, and it's supposed to be very practical for the church, so it's like, okay. But we did want to talk about it a little bit and come to an agreement about how we would approach the topic. And yeah, so afterwards, we were excited, but that was a long time ago. And don't know what your life is going to be when the time comes. And so I've had some changes in life, and then I was kind of dreading because I couldn't get my head wrapped around it. But praise God, we got it done, and people seem to enjoy it. So
yeah, it's been just fantastic. You were fire last night. You were just fire. It was just great. And same kind of response, Lennett?
Very much. And,
yeah.
Well, no, initially I was very excited. And then anxiety took over as we got closer and closer to the date. For me, it's always the tension of retelling the story and knowing that could be a trigger in itself. Just to re-traumatize. The more vulnerable you are, telling your lived realities, it just brings back all these, a wave of emotions. And so I was saying to my sister, I said, I don't know why I'm so anxious. There's just a real nervousness of stepping into the moment and being so vulnerable and not wanting to present as an angry man or the angry black man, but hold that tension of a righteous indignation. So we are here, we're on the sofa, and we made it. And I'm smiling, so I'm not angry.
Well, there's still more to come tonight, right? It was raised to me actually in class earlier in the week after the first lecture, because I was sort of being very, probably in some ways too triumphalistic, saying, wasn't this great? And this is just great. And someone reminded me that this is traumatic for people, and that you are not only sharing from your traumas, but that is a trigger for other people who are listening as well. And that was a great point of awareness for me. And I wonder if you have any advice at all for when we do talk about these issues, how can we make sure that we're sensitive to the whole room? So some people are maybe very comfortable talking about their experiences. For others, it could be very traumatic, more so maybe even than for others, because everyone responds differently and has processed differently. I wonder if you have any advice for
If
me
you
on
have the privilege of listening, then I would ask you to do that actively and to lean in with a sensitivity, not to be dismissive in your responses, or that really doesn't happen, or that's how Lennett saw it. We can we can dismiss, we can rationalize, we can say, that's United. He watches too much TV, you know. But this is the skin. When you said that last night, this is the skin that I'm in. And so we would ask the listeners to listen, to validate, to affirm, and believe the stories told.
I would also add to that that I understand that for some of the listeners, they are also experiencing trauma. When people hear these stories and they understand that these things are happening to human beings, and if they are people who care about other human beings, it can be disturbing and it can be even traumatic for them. And so I think one of the things that you can do for that is, in the beginning, you can acknowledge that some of these things are hard to hear as well as hard to say. And so I think that if we can give people room to experience that, and to know that, I mean, hopefully there are resources if people need to process further than the conversation in the room that day, that they can reach out to those resources, but that we're all here because we all desire together to make a change, right? And it affects each of us, all of us, and it affects us differently, but I cannot invalidate your response to what's being said any more than you should invalidate my telling. So I want to be sensitive also to the hearers, to know that it may, I mean, when I put up the picture last night of the KKK in a town in New Brunswick, I would hope that people were disturbed, you know, and that it troubled them. And it would help them to see that we did and we do have a problem here in Atlantic Canada. It was not just the United States.
Absolutely. I'm just grateful for your willingness to step into this space. And I was thinking about, you know, how did your previous experience in church, maybe growing up or as you came through adolescence, did the church prepare you for living into your skin? Was the church helpful, and in what ways?
I think so, because I've often said I've come from churches where the pastors were civil, you know, they were civil rights advocates. They marched with King. They preached these things over the pulpit, and so growing up in churches where that was the witness kind of helped to shape me. In terms of, I never thought I would be a pastor, but now in the pastorate, I realize that a lot of the passion that I feel around these issues comes from my upbringing in church, as well as, you know, my actual living in this skin. And I think in many Black churches, that's probably been the experience, because these are issues that we face. We don't have the luxury of ignoring these things because we live them every day. And I think that most Black people have had some exposure to, church-going people, have had some exposure to that in their churches if they came up in a traditionally or historically Black church. And so I think that does kind of help prepare you, and it certainly does shape your thinking.
Thank you, Rhonda.
We say all the time, why have the church in the community if the community is not in the church? And so we would bring the live experiences of the week into the church. And we would hear our prophetic voice, the preacher, address pulpit and community. It was very much not what happens in the four walls of this edifice, of this building, but how can we spill over into community and impact lives? It was a place where your voice was heard and affirmed, where you saw yourself in leadership. So yes, very much. It was the DNA of my church growing up. I am pastoring the church in which my mother went into labor on Sunday morning. So this is my home church. I was born there, and so it gave life, it gave purpose, it gave identity to me and to the struggle. And as Rhonda said, they were civil rights leaders. I heard in the pulpit about our fight for justice, about us being the image bearers of God, that we are salt to the earth. I heard that we can we can make impact and infuse culture. So it was always in our DNA. I don't know how you can be a church and not impact the community in which you are in.
I've been really interested in this as I've been learning more about Black churches as the place where leadership in community has been nurtured. And that's been fascinating to me. And I wonder also how that worked out in your life and how that is working out today. Is that something that those churches have hung on to in their legacy, or is that something that's being lost? Where do you think that's going?
I'm proud of our history at Emmanuel Baptist in that there was always a sense of call from pew to pulpit, that they have a long, rich history and legacy of affirming the congregant, of identifying the call of God. I was 8 years old, and little Lenny, God's gonna use you. You know, there's a call of God upon your life. It was an affirming spot. That's where we got to do our public speaking and our in youth group. And when you didn't have a voice outside of the community, it gave life to you. It gave you confidence to be you. It celebrated you. And so, but it's not lost on me that we have lost a generation of pastors that are seeing and affirming the call of God in this generation. I only say that because it was a buzz that someone was mentoring someone was pouring into others, and I don't see that same intentionality of recognizing the call of God on people in this generation and affirming that and celebrating that and say, have you considered ADC? Are you going there?
Amen.
I would say the same thing. We in the Black church, we were actually talking a little bit about this last night with some of the students coming into seminary. When I went to the seminary as a second career person, or mature student, as you like to call it, and so you had those who were coming out of college going directly into seminary who were in their 22, 23-year-olds, and they just froze in preaching class when they learned they had to preach. It's like, oh, I've never preached. Well, that would not be the story of any person, even a 22-year-old in the Black church. If you went to your pastor or elder and you said, I believe I have a call on my life to preach, I've been called to preach, the pastor would throw you in the pulpit. We'll see if you're called to preach, and so you always had your trial sermon, they called it, and people affirmed you in the church. But growing up as a child, we didn't have separate children's church. That was a relatively new concept in the 80s, I think. We had the children were always in church. So we went to Sunday school before church.
That's right. Yeah.
And then we went upstairs to church. And actually some Sunday schools had adult classes. So the parents were in Sunday school as well. And so when we got to be a certain age, if our Sunday school teachers noted anything particular about us in terms of speech, oh, this person's a good public speaker, because you had to present something, they would, Youth Sunday, we want you to be the speaker, or we want you to do this. We always had Youth Sundays. And we always exercised the gifts in children. So that's the atmosphere I grew up in. I remember from, I think, 5th or 6th grade, speaking in my church. And so I came along speaking in my church. It wasn't new to me when it was now I'm called into the ministry.
It was Cornwallis Street Baptist Church that afforded me the first preaching opportunity at the age of 9.
The mother church.
The mother church. Yeah. I stood behind the pulpit and no one could see me because I was so short. But the Reverend reached into his office, got me his footstool. I mounted the pulpit and declared, I preached Noah and the flood, that the world is wicked and the rain is going to come. Didn't know what I was preaching, but it sounded good. It sounded good to a 9-year-old.
Well, it must have sounded good to someone else because you're still here. And I'm awfully glad. It's interesting because some of what you're talking about I can really relate to, in the sense that in the neighborhood I grew up in, there wasn't a lot of opportunity, but in the church was where I certainly found my leadership feet and was given so many opportunities, but was never I mean, I guess because I was a woman and it was a non-affirming of women church that I didn't have opportunities to preach until I left and then came back, which, you know, it was a growing experience for everyone.
Right.
But the leadership formation that took place there
Yes.
was key. And I wonder, though, where you learn to be advocates for justice, because I did not learn that in that context. So for me, it was about, I could, you know, talk about the word and I could evangelize my friends. And I was thrown my first, you know, vacation Bible school class when I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and I had to look after them. And you learn as you go. But I never learned to be an advocate for justice.
You didn't have to. That's my point, right? You didn't have to. We had to, because we were experiencing injustice every day. And so when you experience injustice, then you struggle for that, and it becomes this kind of push inside of you to say this isn't right. Yeah, there are probably lots of people of color who might just go along and say, well, that's kind of the way the world is, and you just live with it. But there are those that are deeply disturbed, and you know, you cannot rest until something is done, something is changed, and you realize that if you want to see that change, you have to sometimes make it happen. You have to add your voice to whatever's going on out there to say, you know what, I want to speak up about this. And because we had those examples of people, then you had the opportunity to do that. So I think that for lots of people who are not an oppressed people, the world goes on. That's part of what I was talking about with white privilege. The world just goes on, right? And they're not experiencing these things every day. But I don't have that luxury. I don't have that choice. I have to endure whatever comes my way, and I have to put on my armor every day to be able to go out into the world and function. So it becomes necessary to add your voice to whatever the struggle is.
It was modeled for us. And I think back to Dr. Willard P. Clayton, who modeled the importance of education. We heard it. Don't stop. Don't stop. You know, he fought for education to open doors for yourself. When I think of my godfather, Reverend Redford Bryant, who was the pastor in the 60s at Emmanuel Baptist when we were fighting for preservation and protection of our homes, fire protection. And so we heard it from the pulpit how the men in the community, I'm a 70s baby, so I wasn't there when the fire department was built, but just growing up in that atmosphere and hearing the story that we had to fight. We had to fight for the preservation of our community. So Upper Hammonds Plains is home to the first all-black volunteer fire department. You know, it was a community member that freely gave her land so that there was a plot of land so that our men, after working all day, would come home and start building a fire department because the fire departments in the local area would not respond to our calls. Or by the time they responded, tragedy already occurred, right? And so when you grow up hearing these stories, it's just a part of your reality. It's a part of your story that you say, we have to do this. When I arrived at Emmanuel in 1999, they were already in litigation with the city to fight for drinkable water in my community. So I just showed up at the meeting being the pastor of the church. Oh, what's going on here? And then they said, oh, the reverend is here. He has something to say. I have nothing to say. This is my first week on the job. And they pass you the mic because you're going to lead us. You're going to lead us to the province house. We're going to get drinkable water, and buddy, it's on your watch. Welcome. You know, so you step into it.
I just wonder how we can kindle that expectation, you know, elsewhere, because I hear you say that, you know, I had the luxury of ignoring whatever was, you know, because it wasn't my skin. Yeah. But when I come to a point, I learned the call for justice from outside of the church, and then that's why I came to Acadia, because I thought, if my faith doesn't have any answer for these questions, but the secular organization I'm working for does, then what's the worth of my faith? So had to learn to push into it that way. That's not going to be for everyone to take that path. How can we work harder so that we see that although it's not my lived daily reality, I need to see that the gospel calls me to partner in that fight for justice, to be part of that call for justice. Do you have any advice for those people in churches where, okay, it's not a daily lived reality for them, but how do we make sure that the call for justice is clear from pulpit and classrooms and so on? It seems so important to me because it's essential to the gospel. It's central to the gospel.
Well, a gospel void of justice is not a gospel at all.
Absolutely. Where's the good news in justice?
So I think that's partly a call for the academy. I think in the training of people into ministry, that this institution has an opportunity to, add that to the curriculum or to at least raise people's awareness in that regard. But in churches that are out there and people who are in these churches and the general body of people who call themselves Christians or believers, I think that they have to care. You have to have a concern about what is going on in the world. And if you haven't been taught to this point that is a part of the gospel, that this is what we're called to do, that Jesus was one who stood up for the marginalized, that Jesus was the one who was calling for justice, that we have so many passages in Old and New Testament about this, that I think that if you haven't had that to this point, we are here this week to try to remind you that is part of who we're supposed to be as followers of Christ. But I think that people sometimes have to challenge the leadership in their churches, right? You have to talk to your pastor about the fact that this is never discussed, or we never talk about what we can do as a church family in the fight for justice in the world. What kinds of projects can we do in the church? How can we toss our hats into the ring to say we want to be a part of the solution? And so I think that it might, have to be a grassroots kind of an uprising to say, you know what, Rev, you need to talk about this stuff. Right. We need to hear about this stuff. And I think that change can begin to happen because we are now seeing in our churches a generation of people who care about what is happening in the world. And so I think they will be very different from their parents and their grandparents in terms of challenging what they see happening and what they feel are the injustices. Everybody won't care about the same things, right, but everybody needs to care about something, right, And so I think that we need to just try to continue to foster that in the generations that are coming, and for the people who are already there, hopefully they hear, whether it's from the Simpson Lectures or something else that is happening that catches their ear in the media or, whatever they listen to, podcasts, that will ignite a fire in them. But people need to understand that this is part of our identity as disciples of Christ Jesus.
Yes and amen. And therefore there needs to be an acknowledgement that the discussion on justice is not a liberal conversation, is not for those that are progressive, AKA, but when are we going to acknowledge that the concept of justice originated with God himself? He's a God of justice. He leaned into justice. And I always say that he chooses the side of the oppressed. And so I don't know if there's a message, again, void of justice, then I would say your theology and doctrine is very weak.
I wonder then, you see, and I know we're going to have to move on and get some questions eventually, but I have so many. I wonder then what role we have in correcting what has been, I think, an imbalance in many of our churches and perhaps even in our training, because you know, I was told not to sloganize when I started asking about, can I study justice, you know, and that sort of thing. And this was many years ago, you know, before they started kind of saying you're a liberal person if you talk about justice. But I couldn't get away from the fact that when I read scripture, it was everywhere. It's at the heart of God. It's connected with the love of God. It's, you know, when it comes to Jesus, it's the Magnificat, it's Luke 4, it's all of it. It's there through and through and through, that what Jesus came to do was not just talk about a spiritual liberation that we'll fly off to someday when we're dead, but
Right.
something we live into now.
Yes.
So, I mean, how can, and this is here where I'm asking you to speak to me as president of Acadia Divinity College, how do I make sure that the next generation of people coming through this place in preparation for ministry, and we don't even know what it's going to look like, let's be honest, how can we make sure that what we've been talking about here, a commitment to justice as a crucial part of our ministry, is present? How do we do that?
What have you found since you've been on the staff here, Rev?
It's been both the leadership class and the theology and practice of racial justice. Find that students are fully engaged. There are many aha moments, but they're willing to lean. Now, I understand it's an elective. They can sign up for it. It's not a, it's not a required course.
Yet.
I was going to say that may be what needs to happen.
But that may be, yeah, right. But those that intentionally, deliberately show up every week, ready to fully engage. There's already the buy-in that we need to do better. We need to break the silence. We need to be the church, right? And so I'm blessed by that. I don't walk away frustrated. I don't walk away, another generation we've lost. You know how there's hope. I am so hopeful that our future is bright, but the question is asked week after week. We signed up for this. How about those that don't believe in this?
And your Old Testament required courses, and your New Testament required courses can include a module on justice. You know, that would not be some offline kind of a, way far off field kind of a thing. It's in the Old Testament, it's in the New Testament. Why not have a module on justice and have people to at least get that part of it, even if they don't sign up for this elective course? Then maybe that will whet the appetite to learn more. But I think that when you talk about how can we get it into the students, I think that they have to have a class that actually includes it, and it not be an elective class, that every student gets it, right?
It was so encouraging when Dr. Britton was talking about David George, and in her first lecture on the awareness, the call, and so many in the chat were saying, heard this name before in class, in church history, so yes, it's being, but we can push the envelope, we can push, and as you said, it's not a far stretch.
Yeah.
No, I really appreciate that, and I hear you in that. I think on the whole, it is woven through many of the courses. I know certainly it's in the biblical studies courses, because you and I, Rhonda, have been part of some of those conversations, I think, in an Old Testament class. And so I know that it's happening. I want to make sure that it never gets lost. And so my goal is certainly that the course on justice will become required for everyone. It just, we don't want to take too much time. I'm hearing you, and I'm not looking for an out, but always open to hear what we can do better, because sometimes, we want seminary education to be something that engages people and prepares them for what's happening now. And not
in their community.
Exactly.
Even there's a mentality that they're pastoring a church. Where we grew up with the mentality we're pastoring a church and community. They weren't separate. So how could I be the pastor of Wolfville Baptist but not pastoring Wolfville? Like, if there's injustice in my town, in my city, does the church just shut down and we love Jesus, la, 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 head in the sand? If there's an elephant in the room, we have to acknowledge the elephant. Or do we just go into our holy huddle You know, I loved yesterday, even in the seminar, hands raised, hands stretched. It's the analogy that we are the very hands and feet of Jesus. Now, as he was, so are we in this world.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that's probably a good segue, because again, I could talk with you all day, but we do want to give people as much opportunity as we can in the next not quite half hour or so. So I'm wondering if there are any questions that are coming in.
Hello. Yes,
Hello.
we have some questions. We have some questions from the online crew. First one is, do you have any suggestions for teaching and equipping youth in particular with connecting their faith to confronting racism?
Resources again.
Yeah, I think that goes back to whatever the church is doing. If you're talking about youth in church, I assume it goes back to whatever the pastor is doing, and the leadership in terms of whether it's Sunday school or youth group, that they are addressing some of these things. And there are wonderful projects that I think can get children interested. So we had our Sunday school group who were probably ages 5, maybe we even had a 4-year-old to 10 or 12, and they decided that they would raise money to contribute to Souls Harbor in Halifax. And so they did some little projects, and they sold some things, and then they presented a gift to Souls Harbor, and they did it 2 years. And so it kind of got them, what is Souls Harbor? What do they do there? When they learned what they do there, then say, okay, we want to help them. And so I think that children are wonderful about being open to these kinds of experiences, and they want to do something to help other people. So when it comes to that kind of thing, you can get them involved in as an introductory thing, get them involved in a project like that, and then they begin to awaken to, there are people in the world who don't have what I have, or who need some help, and I can help them. And so I think that's the seed that gets planted. Yeah.
I'm thinking that there might be in future an opportunity, maybe through the anti-racism working group or something, to have a page where we can point people to some resources for education and so on, because that seems to be an ongoing need and request. And I'm pretty confident there are resources out there, and we just need to maybe collate some of those and share them with folks. Great question.
Another one here. Do you think the lack of learning to be an activist in a white church, yes, in quotes, is connected to discussions about charity? And she uses an example, like, was Anna encouraged to do charity in her church as a child, but maybe not find out why that was needed in the first place? We have food banks, but don't often talk about why people need food.
I love it. Show up tonight. That is part of my call to action. That's part of the call to action, to move from charity and even compassion to justice. Because it's one thing to have a heart that is tender and merciful, and just, the empathy and just wanting to give, wanting to donate, wanting to do good acts. But Desmond Tutu said, don't confuse charity with justice. He said, I'm tired of just pulling people out of the river. When am I going to go upstream and find out why are people falling in? We need to be intentional on removing the barriers, the inequalities. And as you said, I can help out at the soup kitchen, or I can find out what the real issue is. Are we going to remove the barriers, or just give people ladders to look over the fence?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's part of the issue in terms of learning about policies that have been put into place that, keep people from participating fully and being able to have these services and necessities in their lives. How is it that we in the north end of Halifax, in the neighborhood of my church, have no bank, no drugstore, we have a drugstore, no grocery store. We're a food desert. And so, when you look at the history of that area and how it went from being this very booming destination, when you're going to Halifax, you're going down to that area that was full of commerce and all kinds of services and entertainment and food and everything. How in the 70s, as a lot of inner cities did, the blight that sets in, people start moving out. When businesses start closing and moving out, crime starts moving in, and then it becomes a place that is not desirable. We're glad that we're now in a transformation where it's coming back, but there are still very absent things in that community, and people always have to go outside to get it. And so I think when you start looking at what are the policies that are in place, what is the infrastructure that's been built that is keeping people, from accessing the things that they need in life that cause them to have to go to a soup kitchen, then that's when you start to grow these little advocates in your church, who get this, like, I want to do something about this. This doesn't seem right to me. And children have such a strong, passion for things. Right. We always talk about the fact that if we can get children interested, they want to do things. They want to be involved. They're passionate. Mm-hmm. They want something to believe in and to work for. And so if we can get them pointed at Christianity and this idea that Jesus stood up for people, that Jesus would say this was wrong, that could really, hook them and get them to try to break down some of these things that they have inherited, because of what we've done. Yeah.
Margaret, who asked that question, said, I'll be here tonight, even though it finishes after midnight, because she's joining from Scotland. So
Margaret,
your international audience is coming on it.
She's committed.
She is committed, yeah.
Can I follow up for a minute on that one? Because sometimes we act as though we're acting on behalf of the community, but the people in need are within the church, too. Right. How can we make sure that when we're speaking for justice, or even specifically on the issue of racism within the church, that we aren't singling people out? Do you know what I mean? Making them part of the community whilst recognizing that there are particular needs. I mean, I think that's a challenging one, because I would have been a recipient of charity in our church, and we were very grateful for it. I don't remember justice being called for, but maybe it was in a place that I wasn't connected with. But at the same time, as being a recipient of justice, you can sometimes be marginalized within the congregation too. And I wonder, how do we engage conversations with people without making them feel, oh, well, now you're different. You're the black people in the church, or you're the Asian people in the church, or am I asking an appropriate question?
I think it's an appropriate question. And I know that sometimes it can be a delicate situation when you are speaking to the congregation as a whole about something, and there may be people there who might be experiencing whatever it is that you're talking about. I understand that you don't want them to feel, uncomfortable or singled out, or is everybody looking at me? I'm the black person that they're talking about. So I think that, I think that requires a sensitivity on behalf of the pastor. I know that I have pulled, because we're a predominantly black church, but we do have some of our congregants who are not black. And so I sometimes speak to them aside, especially during Black History Month or Martin Luther King Day or something like that, when we're going to be talking about racial policies and things that have hindered us, because I don't want them to feel offended or feel, everybody's looking at me. I'm the enemy. I'm the white person who, and so I like to have conversations with them to make sure that they are not uncomfortable if they know I'm going to be approaching a topic. And what they have said to me is, we very consciously, we know we joined a black church, like a historically black church, and we agree with the fact that these things have happened and we need to be a part of, fixing it. And so I haven't really actually had any negative pushback from people in that regard, but I think it is true that you have to be sensitive to that. I remember doing my internship in South Africa at a white church in Johannesburg. Here's this black female minister, and the pastor stands up and he starts talking about things that have happened to black people in the country, and and I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh boy. So, but I know that these things are true, and I know that the people are not looking at me as, oh, this poor woman who's been downtrodden or something like that. And then talking about charity, he stands up and he goes, now listen, we're putting her in the cottage and she needs this and she needs that. So if you can donate this and you can donate that, and I'm sitting there going, and I'm like, okay, then I'm a charity case. So, but I think, it also takes a bit of maturity on the part of the people, right? So yeah, I think that you can maneuver those things. I don't want you to use that as an excuse, because a pastor can always talk to people, ahead of time to say, this is what I'm going to be talking about today. I don't want you to feel, uncomfortable or anything like that. And they can decide if they're coming to church that day.
But that's why I love your approach to be sensitive and yet provide them with a ministry of presence. You came alongside. This is what we're going to address. We need to verbalize. We need to break the silence. And you are so sensitive to that. And that shows the pastor's heart that they're in a safe place. You're mindful of them. But their discomfort cannot be the excuse of why the issue is not addressed. When I thought about the issue of drug dealing in our community, I cannot turn a blind eye. This is going to be addressed. And there are families that are living off of the
Profits?
Yes. Who may feel uncomfortable. But they're in the church and they're going to hear it. When the issue came to me with the police about the sex trafficking ring in the high school, and that our girls that are doing extremely well academically are being picked up on Friday, driven to Moncton on Friday afternoon, then off to Niagara Falls and back in school on Monday morning. We have to break the silence. There are going to be parents that are going to be embarrassed, and it's not about casting shame. We are lifting us up out of, it's about lifting people up. And so I cry with those grandparents that just are worried and concerned for their grandchildren but again, there's a role to play. We have to deal with the structure, the systems, and the consequences.
And that's the power of evil, isn't it? That you keep the cover on, you don't speak about it, you shine no light, and so it just grows. I think when you lift that rug and you shine some light in there, that's when you begin to break the chains that are binding people. And so I think that people need to understand that these things are not being talked about just because, that it's necessary for us to be free.
Right.
Yeah.
It's necessary for us to be free. I love that. I'm going to tweet that when this is over.
Yeah, tweet that. Put that in the chat.
Put that in the chat. Yes, sir. No other questions?
Oh, there's more questions. Don't. Lennett. This is just a question. What do you see as some opportunities for predominantly white churches to partner with historically black or multi-ethnic churches right now? How can we work together to bring reconciliation? It's probably speaking specifically of churches in communities, rural communities where multi-ethnic might not be realistic. Yeah.
Right. I love that. I have the opportunity to go to Amherst at the end of this month, African Heritage Month, but they are opening the door, wide open, calling the historic AME, African Methodist Episcopal Church. Lennett Anderson is coming down. Can you please join us? Calling the United Church. They're showing unity in the community. We need to seize these opportunities. We need to celebrate or even create the opportunities. I think what a better, I don't think there's any better there's no better time, no better time on the Christian calendar than Good Friday to have a unity service where he tore down the middle wall. We celebrate what our Savior did for the body of Christ, and yet we're in segregated churches. What? No, as I said, no better time than to show unity in the community. Then I think those are pivotal times. I think I know when we were boycotting, protesting, it could have been a black protest in front of Sobeys, but it blessed my heart to see other denominations, to see the Anglican Church, the Wesleyan Church, to see the Pentecostal Church all show up and standing in solidarity with us because they're speaking truth to power. This has to be addressed. I think there's so many opportunities for the church to step in if we just start stepping. You know, Dr. King said, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But for God's sake, do something. Keep moving. Get off your blessed assurance. Stand on the right side of justice. Come on, church. Sorry.
Sorry, not sorry.
You know me. I just think there's a lot of opportunities. I don't think, I think that would be a weak excuse. Well, I don't know what.
Can I say that people can get in a bus and go visit a church? I mean, this is 2022. You can live stream a service from a black church. Like, you could do that. You can invite someone to come. I mean, there's so many opportunities. We just have to step out and not be afraid to offend, not be afraid to have someone say they're too busy to come. I mean, because they might be, but then say, can you recommend someone else? Is there someone who could just come and be with us and chat with us and have a meal with us? Or I just think there's so many opportunities right now to expand our horizons that we only need to be ingrown if we choose to be.
Right. Yeah.
And
I think it'd be interesting for you to go. We are one of the things that the Anti-Black Racism Task Force is talking about for this year's Oasis Assembly is having bus trips to the Black Cultural Center and the Birchtown Black Loyalist Center, so that some of our CBAC family can visit these places and learn about the history. And so it's a matter of logistics, obviously, and whatever the COVID protocols are at the time, but that's what we're talking about. You know, one bus load, two bus loads, who knows who'll jump on the bus. But yeah, we're hoping that people will do that. One of the things that was said yesterday was it's a little bit more powerful if you go to people rather than always trying to have people come to you, because having people come to you can be seen in itself as a kind of power dynamic, right? I've been summoned by the queen, you know, and so why don't you say, hey, let's go and visit a church in Halifax, or let's go visit our neighbor church that this or that, and do that. I know one of the things during COVID that happened for me was that I was asked to speak at different churches, but it was only a matter of recording a sermon. I didn't have to go there, right? So that's the technology possibilities are endless in these days in terms of how you get a presence in your church or how you attend another church, right? So yeah, do that. Just reach out. Like, I think that sometimes people are timid in that first, part in terms of who do I contact, how do I get in contact with that person, but just feel free to reach out, and you'll find that most of the time, as I said, Peter Parris said that black churches have always been inclusive. even though we were treated badly, we have always opened our doors to anyone. And so I think that pastors can just reach out to black pastors, the moderator of the African Baptist Association, and say, who do you have? Are there licentiates or somebody who can come? Like, we need more conversation about this. And even if you want to have a workshop or something like that, even if it's not a worship service, we love to do that kind of stuff. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
All right. Last one is just a comment that you might want to respond to from our friend Lois Mitchell. She says, I wonder if the call for justice has been seen as an emotional call, and sometimes we lack the context and framework of the realities for injustice. It's easy to want justice, but actually dismantling injustices takes a much deeper engagement. Sometimes we're not prepared for. Yeah.
Great comment.
That's
Stu,
right.
would you like to comment back on
Well,
that?
all I can say is, yeah,
Yep.
Lois, we agree.
Yes,
And that's
indeed.
why this is work. This is not, this is work. When you decide that you're going to undertake something, it's work. You can start with small steps, as I said, getting involved, trying to find out why things are a certain way. But when it comes to trying to address policymakers and change policies and get people to see that there are some inequities here and this needs to change, it takes consistent, continual. You're trying to break down a barrier. You have to keep banging on the wall, on the door, and so that's why I think some people, shy away from it. It's like, you'll never get that to happen, or whatever the case is. When we were fighting to keep the St. Pat's Alexandra School in our community, and we joined together with two other neighborhood organizations to try to petition the city for that property. It took 3 years, of this struggle back and forth, and people in the community were saying, I don't know why they're bothering going down to City Hall and nothing's going to change. They're not going to listen to us or whatever. But we held rallies. We sat in City Hall in numbers. We were in the chamber downstairs, filling the room, saying we want this building for our community. And then we had to go to court. We had to go to court. We had to do all of this filing with the legal stuff and writing these statements and briefs, helping the lawyers to do the briefs. And we went to court, and the court awarded us the building. And everybody rejoiced because they're like, we didn't think this would happen. The developer appealed that. And in the appeal, the developer won on a split decision. The Chief Justice sided with us and said the community should have that space. But the two junior justices sided with the developer. So in the end, we lost it. But in the fight, the people realized that if we raise our voices together, we can make a change. They never thought we would get the first victory. And so it kind of, emboldened people to say, you know what, we don't have to take this stuff lying down. We can address it. It takes work. I was exhausted.
Right.
Right.
I was exhausted, but it takes a firm resolve to say, I want to see a change happen. And I think that was just a specific case of a property. But when it comes to policies, we have just pushed and pushed and pushed, and the government has now said, okay, we need an African Nova Scotian Justice Institute. They've approved the monies for that because people were fighting to get it. We've been fighting to get African Nova Scotian stats or African Canadian stats. I think really we were fighting for Nova Scotia into the healthcare system because they don't track what's happening with us. So when you go to get numbers, how many African Canadians are affected by this or who, they don't have the numbers because they haven't been tracking. And so we're like, why is that? You track First Nations, why don't you track us? And we've been fighting and fighting and fighting to make that happen. and now they're opening up healthcare with being able to indicate. So it takes a resolve, and it may take many years, because people have been fighting that fight for many years in healthcare, and the Health Association for African Canadians has been fighting for many years, but we see results. And so I just want to encourage people, yes, to what Lois is saying. It's nice to say, oh yeah, I agree, we need to fight for justice, but you got to be able to to actually put feet to the pavement. We need boots on the ground. We need hands in the fight. We need people who are writing. We need people who are calling. We need people who are protesting. We need people who are approaching the powers that be, speaking truth to power, and so that we make the changes that need to happen.
Advocacy, I'm going to be risky in saying even advocacy can be easy. Marching, walking, holding a sign, that's the easy work. It's policy changing. It's deconstructing the systems and the structures. That's the hard work, and we cannot grow weary in doing well. I'm not going to get the quote right, but James Baldwin said, everything that is confronted won't change, but nothing will change if we don't confront. And so there has to be a mentality shift that we're in it to win it. We're gonna, we're not putting our hand to the plow and turning back. There's some sweat and equity in this game, and we have to live this life. And so I can't grow weary in well-doing. I have to believe that he's a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. And so I'm seeking justice. I'm seeking the way of Christ. And so you gave the example of healthcare and the data and the Justice Institute, but we even been fighting just for land title initiatives, and that those that have been for generations paying taxes but still don't have legal deeds. And finally, there's a yes and amen. But we could have said, oh, it's never going to happen. Ooh. Never going to happen. Technology, never going to happen. Government, never going to happen. And yet, we celebrate the wins. We celebrate that he is faithful. Never seen the righteous forsaken. If I don't have faith, I don't know. I'm just going to roll over.
Amen. Don't roll over.
No.
How are we doing? Okay. Do we have time for more in the room, or what time are we supposed to wrap up? On the hour? On the hour. No?
On half hour.
On the
now.
half.
Yeah.
Oh, we still have time.
No, we're done now.
Oh, we're done.
You're the president. You can
That's
do
what,
whatever
no,
you
I
want.
was just looking for the time edge. We do sometimes go a little bit over. I just want to, if there's a burning question in the room, I don't want to miss it. That's all, because you're here. So are we good in the room? Are we good in the room?
Ron's got all kinds of slips of paper.
Oh, I know. He's got pages worth. You can sit down with the person you TA with, and you can sort that all out, eh? Anyway. Well, we're grateful to the people in the room. We're grateful to those of you who have joined us on the live stream, and those who will watch afterwards. Our prayer together is that we will continue to learn and to lean into what God has for us as the whole people of God, to know what his justice is about, to taste and see that the Lord is good, and to realize that service to the Lord is never easy. It's never just a job. It's a calling for a lifetime of commitment. And I'm grateful, deeply grateful, to Drs. Anderson and Britton to share your hearts with us today, and as you have done all week, and grateful for the partnership that we have and for what that's going to mean for the next generation of church leaders. Deeply grateful. So thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, and please do remember the lecture tonight at 7 o'clock. Be there. It'll be something not to be missed by our dear friend and brother. God bless you this day.